You're listening to Insight here on CapRadio. I'm your host, Vicki Gonzalez. California has ambitious plans, $180 billion worth of ambitious plans over the next decade. That money, according to Governor Newsom, will be invested in California's infrastructure. Everything from roads, bridges, rail, broadband, water storage, and clean energy. All of which the governor says will result in more jobs, like roughly 400,000 more jobs. But you may be thinking, well, that all sounds nice while you're dodging potholes on the road, not to mention summers with rolling blackouts in some areas, or not enough water storage to keep up with all that rain and snowmelt. And with ambitious green energy goals, how will we be able to sustain electric vehicles? So we're going to unpack why now, what took so long, and when the governor says he wants to build fast, how fast is fast. Lance Hastings is a CEO of the California Manufacturers and Technology Association, one of several organizations that supports the governor's plan. Welcome, Lance.
Good morning. Thank you.
So let's start off just for some context for this conversation. Your organization is a CMTA, the California Manufacturers and Technology Association. Who exactly and what exactly do you advocate for?
Well, CMTA is now 105 years old, was founded in 1918 as the California Manufacturers Association. And about 20 years ago, we added the technology word to the name because of the influx of Silicon Valley, Hewlett-Packard, Apple, Intel, et cetera, which are all manufacturers. We just want to have the title of our organization be more thorough. But our primary purpose is to advocate for good policies on behalf of manufacturers in California of small, medium, and large size.
How does California stack up in relation to other states or even other countries when it comes to manufacturing?
Thankfully, California is the number one manufacturing state in the nation in terms of output, facilities, and employees. So we hold on to that. But it's not surprising that we're that way because California is the largest state. So we have that to hold on to. And what we've been finding over the last few years is that it's more challenging to be a manufacturer in California due to the regulations and some of the tax policies and some of what we're going to talk about here in a minute.
Yeah. When it comes to manufacturing in our own backyard in the greater Sacramento area, what industries are here?
Surprisingly, every kind of industry is here within probably a 20-mile radius. A lot of small manufacturers out in the Rancho Cordova area. The Sunrise Corridor is full of smaller manufacturers. They're making components for perhaps some larger things. We have Aerojet. Intel is out in Folsom. We have a new tractor manufacturer, Kubota, coming into Elk Grove, and everything in between. It's really an amazing subset, a microcosm, if you will, of the entire manufacturing landscape.
And you even represent Blue Diamond.
We do,
right?
Which is the closest manufacturer to the state capitol. I love saying that because it's just about 8 blocks from the capitol. They're processing their almonds right there, and they've been doing that for a very long time. I think almost if not just over 100 years, they've been in that facility.
Yeah, typically when you think of a business that's related to ag, you don't necessarily connect it with manufacturing.
You don't, but I'd love to say this. Manufacturers make everything. So if anything that's processed that's turned in from one product to another, that's manufacturing.
What role do our universities play? We have UC Davis, we have Sac State in terms of retaining our talent and not having them leave off to bigger cities.
Yeah, just in this area, like I said, that 25-mile radius, because the mobility centers here at Sac State, I mean, the institutions, the academic institutions play such an integral role because they're helping us advance and study and research and evolve. And in this area, they provide a lot of future employees. So it's a great microcosm, saying as a former Sac State student myself.
What is the Mobility Center?
It's a center here that's really looking at opportunities for how to evolve everyone into that next future, what the future economy looks like. And in order that, I love the name mobility because it really implies that there's an opportunity to grow and to advance. And I just think it's wonderful.
You touched upon this, that it can be difficult to have a business and an industry here in California. When a company leaves California for perhaps being business unfriendly, lured by another state, what are the main messages that you receive?
Really, they're messages of kind of discouragement because as far as I know, no one wants to leave California. In fact, people want to come here still. But it's just much more expensive. The challenges we have with our, particularly the environmental regulations, and I don't mean the regulations themselves, I mean the delays that are built in, and we'll, I'm sure, get to that in a minute on the infrastructure package. But there's a sense of just discouragement when people leave. My larger concern is if we get to a point down the road where other states don't have to offer any incentives because California is just too difficult to do business in. And our organization, we spend a lot of time trying to make it better here in California for manufacturers of all sizes, because if manufacturers are doing well, quite frankly, the economy is doing well.
What tools does the CMTA have when it comes to a manufacturer that's perhaps like kind of, teetering, deciding whether to leave or not? What can you do to keep them here?
Well, we immediately activate our relationships with the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, commonly known as GoBiz. But what we try to do is get ahead of that curve, because once those conversations start to take place, it's probably too late. And that's the most unfortunate thing. So my job is just to create this better environment to attract manufacturers, keep the ones we have, because California is known for its innovation, its quality workforce, and we've been known. That's why we're the largest manufacturing state, probably why we're the largest state as well.
So we're going to be diving into an infrastructure package. Before we do that, if you can peel back, maybe the legislative curtain a little bit and how you work with lawmakers in the state and the governor, when things are being proposed or introduced, what does your association do? What part do you play in this?
The first thing we do, every bill that's introduced is reviewed by our team. Some apply to manufacturers in a very direct way. Others might be in a secondary way. And then there's other bills that are somebody else's kind of stakeholder world. So we go through that culling process very early on in the session. We have a team of lobbyists in-house that we work with. I'll say their names, led by Rob Spiegel, Lawrence Gaden, and Dean Talley. They work for manufacturers every day, and they go to the Capitol. They meet with the staff. They meet with legislators. We have bills that we like. We call it makers. And the bills that we don't like, we call breakers. And that's how we kind of prioritize our approach. And we have one bill that we're promoting this year. It's a manufacturer's investment credit, which is really a way for the state to encourage manufacturers to invest in the state.
When it comes to this infrastructure proposal, why is this happening now? What was the timeline that led up to this?
We have a couple of things that have been going on, and then the real thing that is going on. So coming out of COVID, it's been a challenge. Manufacturers in the business community were really reluctant to invest in California because we just didn't really know what the future would look like. Now we have a better sense of what the future looks like, and there are federal dollars associated with it. So the $180 billion that you identified, much of which is going to come from the federal government, but there are strings attached. California has to have certain things in place by a certain amount of time to make it work. And that is the sense of urgency that we're dealing with in the governor's package that he announced just a few weeks ago. And the legislature has been having hearings, committee level, joint hearings, et cetera. We've been participating in that. Now we're really discussing what the urgency is more than we are the policies.
As someone who works and lives in California and represents a big industry in California. I mean, you drive on the roads, maybe power has gone out for you at some point during a blackout one time or another. I mean, do Californians have a right to be cynical about proposals like this when it comes to infrastructure?
They absolutely do. And in the hearing just last week, I testified in a hyperbolic kind of way, but the California infrastructure is broken. Because if we can't keep the lights on, as you identified potholes, just driving here today, I had to avoid several. Infrastructure is the fabric that holds society together. And I don't just mean economically. It just literally, without that infrastructure and broadband and people are infrastructure too, it starts to fall apart. And as our economy evolves into a larger stature on the global scene, it's kind of a dichotomy that our infrastructure really isn't up to snuff, including that electric grid, as we do transition to a more electrical-focused economy. We're just not quite there yet.
You mentioned that the $180 billion that's being proposed, a good chunk of it is coming from the feds. But when it comes, where's the rest of the money coming from? And this also comes as the state is facing a $30 billion plus budget shortfall.
I mean, it's a classic example that you can pay for it now or you can pay for it later. But if you pay for it later, it's going to cost a lot more. So it's that harmonic convergence of all of these issues in the post-COVID environment with the federal government recognizing that the U.S. infrastructure is challenged. But right here in California, it's most challenged. And the governor deserves credit for leading on this issue and recognizing that now is the time. And that's why the business community and others, including our friends in labor, some in the environmental community, we're all supporting this effort with a definite sense of urgency.
So is this coming? Was this part of the May revise?
At the moment, the plan is to be part of the budget process. So the revise is how they look at where we were with revenue and expenses. This is kind of in addition to that. But the timing, it coincides with the budget that will probably be voted upon by the legislature either as early as Thursday, I think is when they're going to do it because the deadline's approaching. And then there'll be all what are called the trailer bills that follow on from the major budget framework that'll be adopted later this summer.
Allocating money is one thing. Spending it well can be an entirely different thing. What kind of accountability is attached to this?
I think because the high profile that everyone's putting on, there are a lot of people are going to be watching, including us, to make sure that the money is spent in the right way, on the right projects for California. And microchip manufacturing is really important to the state, but also this region. And we want to make sure that CHIPS Act funding, as much as we possibly can have come to this area, actually comes to the area. So we'll be watching.
You're listening to Insight here on CapRadio, and we're talking about Governor Newsom's 10-year, $180 billion plan and priorities for building back California's infrastructure. We're talking with Lance Hastings, CEO of the California Manufacturers and Technology Association. Okay, so let's dive into this infrastructure package. It is a meaty package. What are some of the key pieces that you want people to know about?
I think the biggest issue is the cost of regulation, like I mentioned before, and the delays. So one of the key features is that for a CEQA, which is the California Environmental Quality Act, that a permit would have to be reviewed and approved within 270 days. And that sounds sometimes like a long time. Why does it take that long? And in other cases, it may take years for a CEQA permit to actually be approved. So that notion alone, just removing the delay for projects, I think, is one of the key features of the whole thing. And the second part is the kind of selfishly, the CHIPS Act, attracting chip manufacturing back to the United States in a post-COVID environment, because the supply chains interruptions that we experienced during COVID really kind of showed some vulnerabilities to the United States. So to bring those manufacturing back to California, I think would be incredible for us. But to get things from here to there, you need the roads, the bridges. And my first comment on the package was we can't forget the human infrastructure. A working workforce that's trained, ready, and wanting to go into the manufacturing space is really critical.
When you say expediting, I immediately think of Highway 50, which is not too far from us. When it comes to road construction, I mean, this portion of Highway 50 has, I don't know, it's been like years now. It feels like forever, because I drive it every day. How will it help, when it comes to, major interstates and highways and thoroughfares that people rely on to get to work and back?
I mean, I believe that's where the priorities will be and where they should be. And let's use the example in Philadelphia right now, the I-95. They are saying it's going to take months to get that section of their freeway replaced, and that can't take months. I mean, those are the kinds of things that need to be done as quickly as you can get to it. And I think we have some areas in California where that's necessary, particularly the 50 corridor that you just described. It's going to add lanes. It's easy for me to say, we just need to be patient, and that's going to be great. I just hope that project is going to be, the high priority and have the intended effect.
Is a 10-year timeline, is that ambitious? It kind of sounds ambitious.
Two things. It underscores the urgency. I would say if it's a 10-year plan, maybe it should be a 5-year plan. Let's get to it, because a 10-year plan may end up being a 15-year plan, but the longest journey starts with the first step. You got to establish the priorities and the urgency, and then I think the projects will start to flow.
Who is opposed to this?
At the hearings, it's been interesting. There's probably a group of stakeholders within every segment, including the environmental, labor, the business community, that it's a little bit skeptical. But the irony on the environmental side, because there is this sense of expediting things, they have been opposing, any opportunity to reduce the chances they have to challenge. And that came through in some of the hearings, including the Judicial Council, which they had a very prominent judge, gave some very compelling testimony that said if we have to approve these in 270 days, that means other cases need to be put on the back burner. And while true, that's a consequence of reallocating the priorities of the state of California in this very critical phase. And it's something that really needs to move forward.
When it comes to that skepticism, especially from environmental groups, I mean, a component of overcoming that is trust, and trusting that what is proposed is actually going to happen, especially when you're talking about a long timeline that can be 10 to 15 years. Is it fair for environmental groups to think that the environment, the ecosystem can be compromised from something like this?
It's always fair for people to think what they want to think. The interesting thing, and perhaps even ironic thing, is many of these infrastructure projects are green-oriented. It's to have a cleaner environment, to rely less on more carbon and other kinds of fuels. And that's the irony, because the expedition of these permits would be to have greener projects. And that it's a little bit ironic.
We actually got an email this week from one of our listeners. The timing was well since you're going to be joining us, RJ, and he wanted to know how California would be able to handle the growth of electric vehicles, right? He says basically we may end up with millions of more electric vehicles on the roads, good for the environment, but without enough places to charge them. What is in this plan to address that?
Yeah. That is really underscores everything. As we move toward an electrical economy, we have to build a grid that can sustain that. And quite frankly, at this moment, we don't have it. I'll just say it straight up. We don't have it. I have an electric car, and I have to find places to charge it. And unfortunately, my home is the most reliable location. So as we build these out, that will prepare us and lay the groundwork for a future electric-based economy that we don't have at the moment. So start with those kinds of projects. We start to see them come online. Then it'll build public confidence in where we're headed, because right now it's a little bit concerning where we sit right now.
New jobs are also promised with this, like 400,000 good jobs, and that's in quotation marks. I think that's what the governor actually said. What are these jobs? What are these good jobs?
So thankfully, there'll be manufacturing jobs and construction jobs and project-oriented jobs that have always been good, but because of the delays with some of the, as I keep coming back to delays, it's been difficult to have more of those. But the infusion of the funds that would come as a result of this will be significant.
What happens to the manufacturing industry in California without this package?
Well, I don't want to do a tale of woe, but without the commitment from the government to be a partner in the development and maintenance of our infrastructure, things start to fall away. I will say that two of the most important things that humans have ever developed, manufacturing and transportation. Because if you can make it and can't get it anywhere, what can you do? But if you can drive all over the place, but your car can't be rebuilt, you're in trouble. So those two things taken together literally drive the economy, and that's why it's so important right now that we pass, this package this year and not wait into next year, because if we wait too long, we're going to miss the financial opportunity.
What are the next steps to get the green light? Because you are one of the supporters, but I believe also the California Chamber of Commerce supports this, as well as some unions and other organizations.
We're just calling on the governor and the legislature to come to a meeting of the minds, agree on the proposals, and move them as expeditiously through the legislature as they can. The legislature is in session until September 14th or 15th. That's our window. There's going to be a summer break here coming up, but there's just probably about 10 weeks of serious legislative discussion ahead.
Is there financial oversight attached to this proposal?
I'm sure there will be, because federal funds always come with some kind of oversight, but we all need to be good stewards of the precious resources that taxpayers provide, and I think this whole project our program allows us to really focus in on that.
For your association, is it perfect as it stands, or is there anything that you would like added or changes to this infrastructure proposal?
It's as good as it can be at the moment. I'll kind of reserve broader judgment until we see the details. But the fact remains, if we are going to have an infrastructure discussion, let's have it. Let's identify those projects and literally let's move forward. And that's what the objective is here.
Finally, Lance, when it comes to someone listening who doesn't have this direct connection with manufacturing in their lives, although it does touch us every part of our lives, what is the tangible impact that they may see if this gets the green light, within some relative immediacy, like within the next, 1 to 2 years?
Well, a lot of economics is just based on how people approach things, if they're optimistic or pessimistic. So this is the kind of thing that makes people more optimistic about the future. And with those jobs and the infusion of resources to the local economy, because of those good wages, taxes, et cetera, California will, really rightfully claim that fourth largest economy in the world with a solid foundation. And the infrastructure investments that we're going to make now are going to last for a generation or more. And it's really critical that we make those now.
Given that you've been testifying a lot, and especially recently, and you've been listening to a lot of interesting testimony in your own words, what's your confidence level as it stands right now?
Confidence level is high. The rhetoric is also high, and just we'll get through this. And I think it's just going to require a kind of a meeting of the minds and really people getting down, sharpening their pencils, and figuring out how we can make this project and proposal work. And we will.
Lance, thanks for the time.
Thank you, Vicki.